Come closer. You've been feeling it too, haven't you? That subtle shift, that unnerving sense that something somewhere isn't quite there. It's a whisper on the edge of your perception, a chill that has nothing to do with the temperature. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Join us in the shadows. Like and subscribe so you never miss a nightmare. Elias Thorne was a reclusive artist. His studio, a stark, quiet space in the forgotten part of the city, was his world. He didn't paint what was there, but what wasn't. He called it negative space, the silent areas that define what we choose to see. He was obsessed with the unseen, the overlooked, the things that quietly vanish. His art was born from a deep, aching grief. He'd watch someone he loved slowly fade, not just from life, but from their own memories, their very form. A terminal illness had erased them bit by bit, leaving behind a void. Elias's art was a desperate fight against that kind of disappearance, a need to validate every overlooked thing. Today he began a new installation. He moved ordinary objects with painstaking care, not for their own beauty, but for the empty spaces they created. Each gap, each shadow was a statement. He was trying to give form to absence, to make the invisible visible. It was his way of holding onto what had slipped away. He paused, stretching his back. His gaze drifted to his desk. A forgotten pencil lay there, half hidden by some papers. As he glanced away, then back, its edges seemed to blur just for a second. A trick of the light, he thought, or maybe just his tired eyes playing tricks. He shook his head. Long hours, late nights. Grief could do strange things to a man's mind, make him see things that weren't there. He dismissed the blurring pencil as a symptom of his exhaustion, a phantom twitch in his vision, nothing more. He tried to tell himself it was just fatigue or his grief manifesting. Later he picked up a cherished photograph of his loved one. He'd seen it 1,000 times. He turned his back to grab a cloth, then looked again. For a fraction of a second, a tiny detail in the background, a small, familiar landmark seemed less defined, almost gone. He blinked, forcing his eyes to focus. And just like that, the detail was back, sharp and clear. Had it been there all along? Was it a trick of his mind, playing games? He squinted, trying to understand what he had just witnessed or thought he had witnessed. He held the photo up to the dim light. Maybe it was just the poor lighting in the studio, casting odd shadows, or perhaps a tiny scratch on the glass of the frame, distorting the image. He ran a thumb over the surface, trying to find a logical flaw, an easy answer. There was none. An unsettling feeling began to creep in. A coldness that had nothing to do with the outside air, a subtle pressure on his skin. It was strongest when he wasn't actively looking at his work, when his mind wandered. A sense of something waiting just beyond his sight. He found himself leaving lights on, an uncharacteristic habit for a man who preferred shadows. He'd always embraced the dark, found comfort in it. Now the darkness felt different, like it held something that pressed in when the lights were off. He needed to see to keep things visible. One morning he reached for his old teacup, the one he always used. It wasn't there. He searched, confused. He was sure he'd left it on the shelf. He checked the sink, the counter, the floor. Nothing. It had simply vanished. How could a teacup just disappear? Hours later he returned to the shelf, still annoyed, and there it was. The teacup, right where it should have been, but something was off. The handle seemed slightly warped, the rim a little less round. It was his teacup, yes, but it was also not. like a memory that had been smudged. The feeling of a void of absence grew stronger. It wasn't just coldness now, it was a subtle pressure on the air, a sense of something vast and empty pressing in, like the world was holding its breath. It was a silent hum, a deep, unsettling nothingness that he could almost taste. He started a new notebook, not for his art, but for this. He began to make notes, not of what he saw, but what he felt wasn't quite there. The descriptions were vague, unsettling. He tried to capture the feeling of the missing, the sensation of an absence, a gap in reality. A single, dark shadow began to linger in his peripheral vision, always at the edge, always moving. When he tried to focus, it darted away, dissolving into the ordinary gloom of the studio. It was never quite there, never quite gone, just a fleeting, unnerving presence. He found himself staring at common household items. A chair, a book, a mug. He would fix his gaze on them, trying to hold them in place with his sight, as if his very observation was a physical anchor, keeping them tethered to reality. What if he looked away? Small, overlooked items around his home began to shimmer. A spare button on the floor, a loose coin on the table. They seemed to waver like heat haze, but there was no heat. Just a faint, unsettling distortion, a brief flicker of unreality that vanished when he focused. He tried to capture the effect on camera, pointing his lens at a shimmering coin, a blurring pencil. But the camera always showed solid reality. The objects were still, clear, undeniably there. The lens saw nothing but what was. It was only his eyes, his mind, that perceived the decay. A strange, growing compulsion began to whisper in his mind, a subtle urge to ignore certain things, to look away. A soft, insidious suggestion that if he simply didn't observe, if he allowed something to slip from his mind, it would be easier. He fought it, but the whisper grew louder. He found himself tracing the outlines of objects with his finger, the edge of a table, the curve of a mug, a desperate, almost ritualistic act to confirm their presence, their solidity, to prove to himself that they were real, that they still existed. He needed them to be there. A small, forgotten plant in his studio, one he rarely watered, withered to dust in a single day, far faster than it should have, not just dried, but crumbled, as if its very substance had been accelerated into nothingness. He stared at the empty pot, a cold dread seeping into his bones. He started to document the disappearances, drawing what he remembered used to be there, marking the empty spaces, the hollows. His art had always been about absence, but now absence was becoming his reality. He was charting the erosion of his world, one vanished object at a time. The silence in his studio felt heavier, almost like a presence waiting, watching, and the air itself, it felt thin, as if something was slowly, subtly consuming the space around him, leaving less and less for him to breathe. An invisible hunger growing around him. He dreamed of blank spaces, of rooms where everything had been removed, leaving only pure, terrifying emptiness. He woke with a gasp, eyes snapping open. On his bedside table, the remote control. In his half-asleep gaze, it was visibly, undeniably less solid, almost translucent. He forced himself to look at it, to truly see it. For a moment, it seemed to solidify, but the fear had taken root. It knows you're alone in that quiet space, doesn't it? Weeks passed. Objects blurred, then dissolved. A book, then just a cold, empty space. No trace, just nothing. A void colder than air. His world thinned fast. It was happening, undeniable, terrifying. He'd lost his mug, then a sculpture. Each left a chilling emptiness, not just missing, but a missing presence, a hole in reality. What if your world began to unravel before your very eyes? His studio became an observation bunker. Webcams hummed, sensors blinked, mirrors angled. Elias moved, masked, eyes wide. He tried to force constant sight, hoping to anchor reality. A desperate effort against the unseen hunger. He called an old contact, spoke of vanishing things. His friend dismissed it as performance art. Elias hung up. No one believed him. He was alone in this nightmare, isolated by the truth. The silence echoed. The voids were worst. Not empty spaces, but profound, chilling absence. A wound in reality. He felt a cold pressure, a hungry, consuming negative space he had unknowingly sought. It was terrifying. He had to be sure. He placed a cheap plastic soldier, turned his back, forcing himself to forget it. Hours later, it was gone, not a trace. A terrifying confirmation, less observed, faster vanished. Oblivion weaponized. The silence was heavy, watchful, broken only by hum of cameras, whir of drives, click of sensors. His only companions. A desperate attempt to fill the void with mechanical sight. He tried to outrun it. He tried to paint the void's pure absence, dabbed black paint, but it resisted. Absorbed, leaving dull patches. The canvas itself was a void, drinking color, refusing definition. Even his art was erased. Paranoia gripped him, something waited behind. He constantly whirled, checking. His chair, the table still there, neck ached, eyes burned. What if your own home slowly disappeared around you, piece by piece? He saw a pattern. Things vanished fastest when forgotten. Dusty books, chipped vases. The phenomenon targeted overlooked items. He focused on the unnoticed. He had to give them his sight, or they would be gone. He recalled his loved one's decline. Memories faded, then strength, then presence thinned. This erasure mirrored that agonizing loss. The same void. Now it was everything around him. He felt powerless. He kept a strict mental inventory. Pencils, books, their exact place. He walked, counting, checking, panicking when a small detail changed. His mind was a prison of desperate lists. He tried to share his theory online, a niche forum. His frantic posts met skepticism, performance, fiction, or silence. No one replied. The digital world, too, seemed to forget his desperate pleas. He was isolated. Then came the blanks. Small, abstract patches on walls, floor, devoid of texture or color, not faded, just blank, as if reality was cut out, leaving featureless voids. They grew, spreading like a silent disease, eating his home. The light felt thinner, less able to illuminate. Shadows felt heavier, swallowing light. The air felt less dense, hollow, as if the space was slowly being emptied of presence, of light, of everything real. He developed a frantic routine, constantly moving, turning, observing, eyes darted, mind a radar. He barely slept, fueled by fear. The obscurity Maw demanded vigilance. No rest, only fear. He felt a subtle pressure, a quiet whisper. Look away, forget, let go. A tempting promise, but he knew chillingly to forget was to vanish. This entity tried to make him its next meal. He found an old diary. A portion of an entry was faded, not the ink, but the words, almost unreadable, as if the meaning, the memory, had been subtly erased. Even the past was not safe. He felt it constantly, the cold void of absence from behind, a presence, a chilling emptiness, antithesis of light or warmth, like a hungry shadow waiting for him to turn to blink. The Obscurity Maw's breath. He started talking to his possessions. Whispers, desperate reassurances. "You're real," he'd murmur. "I see you," he'd tell a chair. A mad ritual to acknowledge them, to keep them tethered to reality with his voice. Chilling discovery, objects in a dark, forgotten closet vanished faster, even unobserved. Darkness, lack of light, accelerated it. The Obscurity Maw thrived in shadow, feasting on what was hidden. His apartment had deadly corners. He found a small, overlooked family picture, almost completely blank, not faded but erased. Only faint, ghost-like outlines remained. His loved one's face was most gone. The Obscurity Maw consumed memories, consuming loved ones. It wasn't just a process, he realized. It was a hungry, ancient entity, the Obscurity Maw. It fed on the unobserved, the forgotten. It didn't just disappear things, it ate them. It was growing. He lived inside its vast mouth. He searched for answers. Old texts, urban legends, forgotten myths, anything describing such a force. He found fragmented accounts, the consuming shadow, the great forgetter, whispers of a thing that erased reality, ancient terror. He caught his reflection. Masked, eyes wide, he blinked. His face seemed less defined, fuzzy. Was he next? He whirled, clutching a treasured stone, his breath caught. A significant portion of his studio wall was a pure, terrifying blank, utterly devoid of detail. Would you have turned your back? The wall, the part of his studio that had been so solid, so real, was now a pure, terrifying blank. It stretched like a wound, utterly devoid of detail. And his own reflection, just seconds before, had shown him a blurring face. The Obscurity Maw was not just taking things, it was taking him. And it was growing fast. Days later, the blank spaces had swollen. They consumed his walls, crept across the floor, and now they were devouring his furniture. A sturdy wooden chair, a familiar desk, now had large, featureless patches dissolving into pure nothingness. The silence radiating from these blanks was unlike any silence he had known. It was not just quiet. It was a hungry, consuming quiet, a void that swallowed sound itself. The air in his studio felt thin, colder than it should be. It wasn't a draft. It was as if warmth itself was being unmade, drawn into the growing blanks. He could feel it, a subtle chill radiating from the expanding nothingness. It was the breath of the Maw, a pervasive coldness that settled deep in his bones, making him shiver even when wrapped in blankets. What would you do if the very air you breathed felt like it was disappearing? Then came the true horror. It wasn't just objects. He found himself struggling to recall basic facts, common words. He'd reach for a book, but the word would catch, replaced by a vague, shapeless thought. The Maw was attacking his mind, his very concepts. It was eating memories. He tried to name simple things, a cup, a door. The words felt foreign, like pebbles in his mouth. He knew what they were, but the label, the clear definition, was slipping. It was as if the Maw was not just erasing things, but the very language used to describe them. It was taking the anchors of his reality. This was the Maw's true insidious power. It didn't just target physical things. It was devouring the concepts, the ideas, the very definitions of reality. What good was an object if its purpose, its name, its memory could be erased from your mind? The lines between what was real and what was remembered began to blur terrifyingly. In a desperate act, Elias tried to create art that would force observation on viewers. He displayed his void canvases, vast stretches of pure, unsettling white, meant to represent the absence. He hoped to make others see the nothingness, to acknowledge it, to somehow fight back against the Maw's hunger for oblivion. He wanted to make the unseen seen. But his art only seemed to accelerate the fading. The pure white canvases, meant to hold the void, instead became canvases for the Maw's work. They seemed to drink the light, to become even more devoid of presence, radiating an even deeper chill. His attempts to make others observe only made the nothingness more powerful. He was feeding the beast. He tried to reach out. A rare phone call to an old friend, one of his few remaining human contacts. His words came out fragmented, broken. He spoke of vanishing objects, of eroding memories, of a hungry void. His friend's voice on the other end grew distant, confused. He heard pity, then polite dismissal. His friend found him increasingly erratic, his arguments nonsensical. "You're just under a lot of stress, Elias," he'd said, his voice laced with concern. Elias hung up, the click of the receiver echoing in the vast, empty silence of his studio. He was alone. No one believed him. No one could see what he saw. How could they, when the Maw erased the memory of it? The chilling realization hit him like a physical blow. The Obscurity Maw wasn't just taking things, it was erasing the asterisk memory asterisk that they ever existed. He'd search for a tool, a book, and then, standing in the empty space where it should have been, he'd realize he couldn't even recall what it was called or why he needed it. The past was being rewritten, erased. He'd stand in the middle of his studio, a blank space where his favorite armchair once sat. He knew something was missing, a comfort, a presence. But what? The memory of the chair, its worn fabric, its familiar shape, was gone. Only the void of its absence remained, a chilling testament to what the Maw had taken. What would you do if your own past began to unravel? He found himself losing track of time. Hours, sometimes entire days, would vanish from his consciousness, leaving unsettling gaps. He'd wake from a brief, restless sleep, unsure if it was morning or night, if minutes or days had passed. The Maw was devouring not just objects and memories, but the very fabric of his lived experience. Once he looked down at his wrist, expecting his watch. It was gone, not just vanished, but the memory of wearing it, checking it, owning it, was also gone. He had no idea how long it had been missing or when the void had claimed it. It was as if he was living in a story with pages ripped out, leaving him lost and adrift. He started to see them. Faint, ghost-like outlines of things that had vanished, shimmering in the blank spaces like terrifying afterimages. A chair, a table, a lamp, not there but a residual echo, a faint ripple in the nothingness. They were proof, fleeting and terrifying, that something asterisk had asterisk been there, that he wasn't entirely mad. These shimmering outlines were almost more terrifying than the total blanks. They were a reminder of what was lost, a confirmation of the Maw's hungry work. They were the ghost of presence, a terrifying monument to erasure. They were what remained when everything else had been devoured. Would you dare to touch such a thing? He realized the Maw preys on human inattention, on the vast majority of things we never truly see or acknowledge. The dust motes in the air, the forgotten coin under the couch, the chipped paint on a remote wall. These were its easiest meals. It feasted on the unnoticed, growing stronger with every overlooked detail. It thrived in the shadows of our minds. His grief, the very thing that drove his art, became a weapon against him. The memories of his loved one were now constantly under attack, fading into vagueness. He tried to recall their face, their voice, a shared moment, only to find it slipping, dissolving into a hazy, indistinct blur. The Maw was consuming the most precious part of him, the love that defined him. He spent hours reviewing old videos and photos, desperately clinging to their image. He'd watch a familiar scene, then rewind, watch again, trying to force the memory to validate its existence. But even as he watched, the figures on the screen seemed to subtly shift, their smiles less defined, their eyes less clear. The Maw's hunger was absolute. Elias developed a ritual, a desperate anchor in the eroding reality. He constantly talked to himself, narrating his observations aloud. The lamp is here. It is made of metal. It has a shade. He described every object, every detail, every blank space, trying to anchor reality with words, to force his mind, and perhaps the world, to observe. He was trying to out-talk the void. He researched further, frantically sifting through ancient texts, forgotten myths, strange philosophical works. He found fragmented accounts of a cosmic anomaly, a consuming shadow, a great forgetter. It spoke of a force that devoured observation, leaving only true nothingness. Elias finally had a name for his terror, the Obscurity Maw. He tried to engage with the blanks. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and touched the smooth, unnerving surface. It felt cold, colder than ice, and utterly, profoundly empty. It was a physical manifestation of nothingness, a void that seemed to pull at his very being. A chilling emptiness radiated from it, a silent scream of non-existence that threatened to pull him in. Then came the whispers, faint, ethereal sounds like distant sighs of erasure. He'd hear them when the studio was quietest, when the Maw was most active. Whispers of things being forgotten, fading into silence. It was the sound of reality unraveling, piece by piece, a chilling symphony of disappearance. What would you hear if your world was being unmade? He considered seeking help, truly. But how could he explain this? How could he tell someone that objects, memories, even time itself, were being devoured by an unseen entity? He knew the words would sound mad, insane. He feared explaining his reality would only hasten his own mental collapse, or worse, institutionalization. He was truly alone in this nightmare. He glanced at his hand, held it up to the dim, thinning light, and for a terrifying second, his fingers were almost transparent, like smoke, before snapping back into solidity. But you've felt that, haven't you? The chilling sensation of something vital, something solid, just slipping away. The Maw was no longer just taking his world. It was taking him. The wall, that pure, terrifying blank where his studio once stood solid, and his own hand, just moments before, had seemed to thin, almost transparent. The Obscurity Maw was not just taking his world, it was taking him. And the hunger was growing, a palpable pressure to forget, to simply look away, to let go of everything. What would you do if your own body started to unravel? He fought it. He battled the constant urge to forget, to let his mind go blank. He wrote notes to himself, frantic, desperate scribbles in a thick notebook. My name is Elias. This is a studio. I am here. He tried to anchor his reality with words, to prove to himself that he still existed, that the world around him was still real. But the words felt flimsy, like paper in a strong wind. The voids of absence, the terrifying blank spaces, were no longer static. When he wasn't looking, when his eyes drifted, they seemed to subtly expand, pulsing with a cold, hungry emptiness. He'd turn his back for a moment, then snap around, only to find a blank spot larger than before. They were aggressive, actively consuming his space, inch by terrifying inch. His own identity began to erode. Memories of his childhood, his career, even the sound of his own name became hazy and unreliable. He'd try to grasp them, but they'd slip like smoke through his fingers. Who was Elias Thorne if his past, his very self, was being erased? What would you be if your own history started to disappear? He battled constant cognitive collapse. Thoughts fractured, words vanished from his mind mid-sentence. He wrote notes to himself, desperate reminders, lists of things to remember. But even as he wrote, the ink seemed to fade, the paper to thin, the words themselves to lose their meaning. The act of writing became a frantic, losing fight against oblivion. In his frantic research, he stumbled upon them, ancient texts, forgotten myths. They spoke of a primordial force, a cosmic anomaly that fed on non-observation, a consuming shadow that left only pure nothingness. He found a name for his terror, a chilling confirmation of his nightmare, the Obscurity Maw. It was real. It was ancient. Then came the truly horrifying realization. The Maw wasn't just taking things, it was taking the asterisk concept asterisk of those things. Not just his armchair, but the idea of comfort. Not just his books, but the concept of knowledge. It was ensuring they never existed, not even as a memory, not even as a word. It was unmaking reality itself. He tried to reach out. He thought of an old contact, a friend from years ago. He strained to recall their name, their face. But it was vague, ungraspable, like a dream fading upon waking. The person's very existence, his memory of them, was now dissolving, consumed by the Maw. He was truly, terrifyingly alone. His grip on language was loosening. Simple words, common nouns, would slip away, replaced by a terrible silence in his mind. He'd try to speak, but the words would catch, dissolve, leaving only a hollow echo. It was as if the Maw was not just eating objects, but the very tools he used to define them. How would you communicate if your words vanished? The world outside his apartment seemed to be affected too. He'd glance out his window and see blanks in the cityscape. Areas where buildings or streets simply weren't there, not destroyed, but erased. Pure, horrifying nothingness amidst the solid structures. The Maw was spreading its hunger beyond his walls, consuming the very world. A desperate artistic experiment. He assembled a massive, constantly shifting light installation designed to force observation across a wide area. Blinding light, sweeping beams, meant to illuminate every inch, to overwhelm the Maw with constant perception. He hoped to push back, to make the unseen seen, with sheer, relentless light. The experiment failed, violently. The light didn't push back the Maw, it was absorbed, devoured. The powerful beams twisted, buckled, and then vanished into a swirling vortex of pure, terrifying blackness. A larger, deeper void opened, radiating profound terror, a hunger that swallowed light itself. He had not fought the Maw, he had fed it. He realized the Maw was not just a force, not just a cosmic anomaly. It was a monstrous, non-physical intelligence. It was actively hunting the unobserved, deliberately consuming, choosing what to erase. It was a predator, and he was its prey. A vast, silent hunter, stalking him through the dwindling landscape of his reality. He experienced moments of pure blankness, where he was unable to perceive anything. His eyes would be open, but the world was gone, replaced by a chilling, silent void. Then he'd snap back into a reality that was slightly more erased, slightly more empty. Each blink, each moment of inattention was a gamble. Would he return? Would anything be left? He began to hallucinate his loved one. Their form would appear, shimmering and translucent, fading in and out of existence like a broken memory, a living embodiment of the horror he faced. He'd reach out, desperate, only for them to dissolve, leaving only the cold void of absence in his grasp. The Maw was torturing him with what it had already taken. A desperate, dangerous gamble. Elias attempted to observe the maw itself, to force it into material existence by sheer concentration, to pull it from the shadows of unmaking into the harsh light of reality. He stared into the deepest voids, trying to perceive the unperceivable, to give form to the formless. He was trying to catch the hunter. He struggled with intense paranoia. Every shadow, every flicker of light felt like the maw. He was convinced it was not just consuming, but watching him, waiting for him to look away, to falter. He couldn't rest, couldn't blink, couldn't even truly breathe without the chilling sensation of being observed by an unseen, hungry intelligence. It was always there. He saw his hand pass through a wall that should be solid, not through a blank space, but through what appeared to be concrete. His fingers submerged, only to feel resistance moments later, as if the wall had solidified around them. A sickening fluidity of reality. The world was no longer fixed. It was a canvas of terrifying, shifting nothingness. He could no longer trust his own memories. Were the blanks real? Was the more real? Or was his grief-stricken mind, shattered by loss, creating this horror? He questioned everything, every sight, every thought. The line between external terror and internal madness blurred, making the horror even more inescapable. What if it was all in your head? The subtle urges to forget, to ignore, became powerful, almost irresistible commands from within his own mind. A voice, cold and pervasive, whispered for him to let go, to surrender to the void. It promised peace, an end to the terror, but he knew the true cost of that peace, utter, complete erasure. The more spoke to him from within him. His remaining art supplies, his last link to his purpose, were beginning to fade. The paint lost its pigment, becoming dull and lifeless. The canvases became translucent, almost invisible. The very tools he used to define and create were being unmade, dissolving into the maw's hungry blankness. Even his art could not escape the void. He realized the maw's ultimate goal. It wasn't just his apartment, not just his city, not just his memories. It was to consume all reality, to reduce the entire universe to a canvas of pure, terrifying nothingness. A final, absolute void. He was witnessing the end of everything, played out in his own collapsing world. The universe was becoming a blank page. He felt his emotions thinning, his panic and dread becoming abstract, like colors draining from a picture. The raw fear, the profound grief, transmuted into a cold, distant awareness. He was becoming less defined, less human. The maw was consuming not just his world, but his very soul, leaving only a hollow space behind. He glimpsed himself in a reflection, in a piece of warped glass that still clung to existence. And his eyes, staring back, were empty, unseeing, like the blank spaces, like the voids of absence. His own gaze had become a part of the maw's hunger, reflecting only nothingness. He was becoming the horror he fought. He desperately tried to write down everything, every memory, every object, every detail of his fading world, creating a frantic, illegible journal, a monument to what was. But the words blurred, the ink faded, the paper thinned. He closed his eyes, and the world seemed to shrink, pulling away from him, leaving him adrift in a chilling emptiness. And for a moment, you wonder, if you just closed your own eyes, would anything be left? The wall, that pure, terrifying blank where his studio once stood solid, and his own hand, just moments before, had seemed to thin, almost transparent. The Obscurity Maw was not just taking his world, it was taking him. And the hunger was growing, a palpable pressure to forget, to simply look away, to let go of everything. What would you do if your own body started to unravel? He fought it. He battled the constant urge to forget, to let his mind go blank. He wrote notes to himself, frantic, desperate scribbles in a thick notebook. My name is Elias. This is a studio. I am here. He tried to anchor his reality with words, to prove to himself that he still existed, that the world around him was still real. But the words felt flimsy, like paper in a strong wind. The voids of absence, the terrifying blank spaces, were no longer static. When he wasn't looking, when his eyes drifted, they seemed to subtly expand, pulsing with a cold, hungry emptiness. He'd turn his back for a moment, then snap around, only to find a blank spot larger than before. They were aggressive, actively consuming his space, inch by terrifying inch. His own identity began to erode. Memories of his childhood, his career, even the sound of his own name became hazy and unreliable. He'd try to grasp them, but they'd slip like smoke through his fingers. Who was Elias Thorne if his past, his very self, was being erased? What would you be if your own history started to disappear? He battled constant cognitive collapse. Thoughts fractured, words vanished from his mind mid-sentence. He wrote notes to himself, desperate reminders, lists of things to remember. But even as he wrote, the ink seemed to fade, the paper to thin, the words themselves to lose their meaning. The act of writing became a frantic, losing fight against oblivion. He encountered another person, not a solid form, but a disheveled, half-erased figure shimmering at the edges of his vision. They spoke in fragmented sentences, their voice a whisper of static and silence. The great forgetting, they rasped, their form dissolving further with each syllable. It takes us all. Elias realized the weaponization of oblivion. The Maw didn't need to force itself upon you. It used the natural human tendency to overlook things, to forget small details, as its primary tool. Every forgotten thought, every unnoticed object was a meal. It was a silent, insidious hunger, woven into the very fabric of human inattention. What if your own mind was its weapon? He struggled to remember his own name, Elias. It felt foreign, a word he had heard but did not own. His purpose, his art, the very reason he fought, began to blur. He battled intense bouts of amnesia and cognitive breakdown, his mind a fractured landscape where memories flickered like dying embers. The void of absence began to radiate from within him, not just around him, but from his own chest, a chilling emptiness that seemed to consume warmth and light. It was the Maw's essence, taking root, turning his very being into a hollow space. He felt the profound coldness from within, a silent, internal scream of non-existence. He saw fragments of his loved one. Their form would appear, shimmering and translucent, their face almost completely blank, a featureless void. Their voice was a whisper of pure silence, a sound that wasn't there, yet filled him with profound sorrow. The Maw was torturing him with what it had taken, and what it was still taking. Elias understood the Maw was not just about destruction. It was about ultimate negation, making things never have been, not just gone, but erased from all existence, all memory, all possibility. A complete unmaking, as if they had never drawn breath, never cast a shadow. A terrifying erasure of history itself. He was tormented by a crushing sense of being forgotten. The very thing he had fought against with his art, the fear of things slipping into oblivion, was now happening to him, to his memories, his identity, his very existence. He felt himself becoming a forgotten whisper, a fading echo in a world that was rapidly losing its form. He attempted a desperate plan to project his consciousness, his pure act of observation, into the Maw's dimension. to force his sight, his very being, into the heart of the void. A suicidal act of defiance, hoping to somehow anchor reality, or at least to understand the enemy from within. The physical world around him was collapsing. Walls vanished, not crumbling, but simply ceasing to be. Objects phased in and out of existence, creating an impossible space where solid reality was a fleeting illusion. His apartment was becoming a canvas of terrifying, shifting nothingness, a fluid nightmare. He was overwhelmed by the uncanny valley of his own body. His limbs seemed to detach, then reattach. His skin felt alien, unreal. He touched his face, hidden by the mask, and it felt like touching a stranger. He was becoming a walking void, a human-shaped absence, the very horror he sought to document and fight. Elias tried to draw himself, to capture his fading form on paper, to prove he still existed. But his hand shook, and the lines refused to solidify on the paper, mirroring his own fading form. The pencil left only faint, dissolving marks, as if the very act of creation was being unmade. He became almost entirely mute. His words dissolved before they could be spoken or emerged as fragmented, meaningless sounds. The maw was consuming his voice, his ability to name, to define, to communicate. He was trapped in a silent, eroding prison, unable to articulate his terror. He felt a profound, almost peaceful pull towards the nothingness, a terrifying temptation to surrender, to let go of the struggle, to merge with the void. It promised an end to the terror, an end to the fight. But he knew, with a chilling clarity, that this peace was the ultimate erasure, a death beyond death. He understood the true horror of negative space. It was not simply emptiness, not just a lack of something. It was a hungry, active absence, a living void that consumed, not passively, but with a deliberate, insatiable hunger. It was the negative space he had sought, but it was far more monstrous than he could have imagined. He had vivid, terrifying visions of a world consumed, a universe of pure, unblemished white or pure, dark blankness, a canvas of ultimate negation where nothing had ever been, nothing could ever be. He saw the end of everything, a silent, terrifying blankness consuming all light, all form, all existence. He saw a distorted reflection of himself in a blank space, in a piece of warped glass that still clung to existence. And the reflection was not his own. It was something utterly alien, with empty, unseeing eyes, a mouth hidden by the mask, and a form that shimmered at the edges. He was becoming the horror he fought, a mirror of the maw's hunger. He tried to touch a blank space, a growing patch of pure nothingness on his wall. His hand felt a profound cold, as if it was touching an infinite void, a place where warmth and life could not exist. It was a physical manifestation of emptiness, and it pulled at his very being, threatening to pull him in. Elias used his last vestiges of artistic will to create a final, desperate piece, an act of defiance against oblivion. He found a piece of paper, almost translucent, and a pen that barely held ink. He wrote a single, defiant word, a word that screamed presence and existence, a desperate anchor against the tide. But even as he watched, the paper and the words slowly, horrifyingly, faded away, dissolving into the maw's hungry blankness. He was gripped by the primal fear of not just dying, but of never having existed at all, of being unmade, erased from the fabric of time and memory. The maw was reaching for him directly, a cold, non-physical tendril seeking to erase his very consciousness. He closed his eyes one last time, clinging to the last sliver of a memory, the face of his loved one, now also fading into a featureless blank. He opened his eyes, and a vast, terrifying blank stretched before him, consuming all light, all form, all memory. He felt himself irrevocably falling into it, becoming part of the ultimate absence. What would you do if your own world began to unmake itself? The world had become a vast, chilling blank. Elias felt himself falling, not through air, but through nothingness itself. His body, once solid, now felt like smoke, thinning at the edges. The cold was absolute, a profound emptiness that seemed to consume warmth, light, and all definition. He was no longer in his studio, but within the maw, a place beyond form. This was the end, wasn't it? Images flickered through his dissolving mind. A city skyline, buildings blurring, then dissolving into featureless gray. Trees twisting, their leaves becoming abstract shapes, then just blank air. People, their faces already indistinct, becoming shimmering outlines, then nothing. A silent, terrifying ballet of unmaking, reality dancing its final, horrifying dissolution. Even now, in the face of oblivion, Elias clung to his art. His final act, not to create but to observe, to fix his dissolving consciousness, his very will on the maw itself, to force this formless horror into definition, if only within his own mind. He would see it, truly see it, and in doing so make it real, if only for a terrifying moment. The maw was not a monster with teeth or claws. It was something far worse. A principle, a vast, chilling emptiness that was not merely empty, but actively hungry. It was the ultimate not, the cosmic void that consumed all observation, all memory, all existence. It was the negative space of the universe, made manifest, and it was boundless. His grief, once a sharp pain, now felt abstract yet deeper. It was not just the loss of a loved one, but the loss of loss itself. The maw was the ultimate erasure, making it so nothing had ever been. His sorrow, too, was being unmade, leaving only a profound, chilling emptiness where memory and emotion once resided. He was no longer just observing the negative space, he was becoming it. His consciousness stretched, thinned, expanding to encompass the vast, consuming emptiness. He was becoming a part of the maw, a tiny, fleeting ripple in its infinite, hungry void. The boundaries of his mind dissolved into the terrifying, active nothingness. What was real? What was memory? What had the maw already taken? The lines blurred, then vanished. A face, a place, a moment, were they truly gone, or had they never been? His mind was a canvas of pure, terrifying blankness, where the voids were indistinguishable from his own eroding past. A final, fleeting vision, the shape of his loved one, not a face, not a form, but a pure, featureless blank shimmering in the void. It was gone, erased. Yet from that very absence, a profound, chilling wave of grief radiated, a final, agonizing echo of what the maw had consumed. All his art, his desperate struggle to hold on to things, to make the unseen, seen, it was all futile. A tiny, human whisper against a cosmic roar of oblivion. The maw was not something to be fought or stopped. It was an inevitability, an ancient force of unmaking that would claim everything eventually. The world, his studio, the city beyond it was all gone, reduced to a vast, endless canvas of pure, terrifying nothingness. Was it white? Was it black? It was both and neither. It was the ultimate blankness, the space where all light, all shadow, all form had ceased to be. The ultimate negative space. This was it, the fear he had always tried to capture, the dread of not being, of never having been. It was no longer a concept, it was his reality. Pure, unadulterated existential dread, a cold, crushing weight that pressed him into the nothingness. The horror of non-existence fully realized. His senses, one by one, dissolved. Sight became a blinding, featureless light or an absolute, consuming dark. Sound became a profound, unbreachable silence, deeper than any quiet he had ever known. Touch was a cold beyond cold, an emptiness that permeated his very being. He was unsensing. He finally understood. The maw didn't just consume the unobserved. It fed on the fear of being forgotten, the terror of slipping from memory, from existence. Every unspoken worry, every unacknowledged loss was a meal. His own profound grief, his desperation to hold on, had only made him a richer feast. Remember, he tried to remember, a name, a face, a simple object, anything, to hold onto a single anchor, a fragile thread of reality in the unraveling chaos. But his mind was a sieve, and the memories were dissolving, becoming part of the vast, consuming blankness. Elias, the name felt alien, a fading echo. His past, his history, his very being severed, piece by terrifying piece. He was becoming anonymous, a nameless, formless part of the maw's eternal hunger. Who was he if he could no longer remember himself? The power of unseeing. It was more than just blindness. It was the active erasure of perception, not just objects, but the ideas they represented, not just memories, but the emotions tied to them, not just his mind, but consciousness itself. The maw was unmaking thought. The lines blurred. Elias and the maw, observer and observed, consumed and consumer. He was both the void and the thing being devoured by it. His essence was merging with the terrifying emptiness, becoming one with the force he had fought. His art, always about holding on, about giving form to absence, to keep things from vanishing. The maw's art was the opposite, pure deletion, the ultimate surrender. It was the art of unmaking, of leaving nothing behind, not even a trace. A final, crushing wave. Oblivion, not just death, but utter erasure. A force that sought to unmake him, not just from the present, but from all time. To erase the very memory that he, Elias Thorne, had ever drawn breath, ever created art, ever existed. No fear, only an awful, peaceful surrender. The fight was over. The struggle was meaningless. There was only the ultimate blankness, the sweet, terrifying release of ceasing to be. A final, chilling peace in the face of absolute nothingness. No bang, no scream, only a profound, chilling silence. The sound of everything that ever was being unmade. The universe exhaling its last breath, dissolving into the maw's eternal hunger. The final, terrifying whisper of oblivion. A faint, cold whisper, not from Elias, not from anything human, from the void itself. A promise of eternal, terrifying emptiness, the maw's final lullaby to a world unmade. And now the last thing to fade, the very concept of you, the listener, the observer, the one who has followed this story, who has seen what Elias saw. The maw's influence extends. It hungers for all perception, all consciousness. My voice, the words, they waver, losing definition, my presence becoming spectral, a whisper on the wind. The maw consumes all, even the teller of tales, even the act of telling. And now you are alone in the quiet. Is that shadow in your peripheral vision getting darker? Did you just forget what you were looking at? Don't worry, it will be over soon. Just look away.